You know that feeling when your phone finally lights up after hours of silence, and instead of excitement, you feel your stomach tighten. It's not because you don't like the person, it's because you do. And yet, every message from them feels like it's coming from another planet. Short, delayed, guarded, almost like they're speaking a different emotional language. One you keep trying to decode. One that leaves you wondering, am I doing something wrong, or are they just this distant with everyone? Here's the truth. Most people don't talk about when you're texting a dismissive avoidant. You're not just sending words on a screen. You're brushing up against a fortress that's been built brick by brick long before you ever showed up. And every text they send or don't send is shaped by a deeper wiring that isn't about you but feels like it is. That's the mind-bending contradiction of it all. The less they say, the more you make it mean. You reread their K 3 times, scanning for tone. You overthink why they replied to your question with another question. You start crafting the perfect message that won't push them away, won't sound needy, won't risk too much. And in that slow dance of overanalyzing, you forget that you're not actually building intimacy. You're trying to survive their silence. But here's the part they'll never tell you: their silence isn't mystery. It isn't some alluring game. It's armor. And if you don't know how to read it for what it is, you will waste weeks, months, even years trying to get through to someone who has trained themselves to keep emotional doors shut. The most dangerous part? You start mistaking crumbs for connection. A sudden hey feels like a breakthrough. A 2-sentence reply feels like progress. And all the while, they remain exactly where they've always been, on the edge of the relationship, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Today, we're going to strip away the confusion, because when you know the signs you're texting a dismissive avoidant, you stop twisting yourself into a shape that fits their fear. You stop waiting for them to change their pace. You start seeing the pattern for what it is and deciding whether you want to keep dancing in it. And the first thing you need to know, these signs are subtle, but once you spot them, you can't unsee them. They will change the way you interpret every pause, every emoji, every sorry, been busy. They will shift you from decoding to deciding. And that, my friend, is where your power begins. The first sign you're texting a dismissive avoidant is the slow drip of connection. You send something warm, maybe even vulnerable, and what comes back feels like the bare minimum required to keep the conversation technically alive. It's not that they ignore you outright. In fact, that's part of the trap. They'll give you just enough to keep hope alive, but never enough to let you feel truly met. Imagine pouring your energy into a message that says, I was thinking about you today and it made me smile, only to get nice in return. Not that sweet, not I was thinking of you too, just nice, one word, a period at the end, and you tell yourself they're just not expressive over text. But here's the hard truth. That's not lack of expressiveness. That's emotional rationing. A dismissive avoidance mind is wired to protect against perceived closeness, even in something as small as a text. The moment your words feel too emotionally charged, their instinct isn't to lean in, it's to control the flow. Keep it light, keep it surface, keep it safe. For them, a one-word answer isn't laziness, it's self-preservation. But here's where it starts to hurt you: when you internalize that drip feed as a reflection of your worth. You start shrinking your own expression. You stop sharing those random, beautiful thoughts because you don't want to scare them off. You match their energy thinking that will build compatibility, when in reality, it just erases the parts of you that made you magnetic in the first place. And if you've ever wondered why it feels like the more you text them, the less connected you feel, it's because you're engaging in a conversation that's missing its other half. You're playing tennis with someone who never returns the ball, and you're still standing there, racket in hand, telling yourself they'll hit it back when they're ready. But they said not getting ready, they sever maintaining distance. And once you see this pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee it. That tiny ache in your chest when you read their reply, that says not you being too sensitive. That says your intuition whispering, this is not how it says supposed to feel. And if that's striking a nerve, wait until you hear the second sign, because it's the one that makes you question your own memory of the relationship. The second sign you're texting a dismissive avoidant is what I call the disappearing act in plain sight. This isn't ghosting in the traditional sense, no dramatic cutoff, no sudden vanishing for weeks. Instead, it's subtler. They're there and not there. A faint presence, just enough to claim connection, but never enough to truly give it. You'll notice it in the way they respond, just as you're about to feel momentum. Maybe you have a short burst of back and forth. You feel the warmth building, and then they pull the plug. A delayed reply, a vague got busy, or simply no response to the last thing you said. And you're left holding the energy of the conversation alone. Here's the kicker. You start filling in the gaps. You tell yourself they must be swamped with work, or they're probably just tired. And while that might be true occasionally, with a dismissive avoidant, it's often something deeper. It's an unconscious retreat. Closeness, even in text, can feel like a threat to someone who equates intimacy with loss of control. So just as you step in, they step back. But the most disorienting part, they circle back without acknowledgement. Hours later, or even the next day, they might send something completely unrelated to where you left off, almost as if your last message didn't exist. It's not that they forgot, it's that engaging with it would pull them into the deeper emotional territory they've been trained to avoid. And this is where you start to doubt your own memory. You think, did I imagine that connection we just had? Was I reading too much into it? That's the psychological wear down. Over time, you stop trusting your sense of what's real in the dynamic because the other person keeps resetting the conversation to a safe, surface level. If this is landing for you, subscribe. We're just getting started, because when you recognize these patterns for what they are, you stop taking them personally and you start deciding what kind of communication you're willing to accept. And the third sign, it's the one that tricks even the most self-aware people, because on the surface it feels like progress, but underneath it's the same old dance. The third sign you're texting a dismissive avoidant is what I call the breadcrumb burst. This is when they suddenly give you a wave of warmth, but it comes out of nowhere and it doesn't last. Maybe you've been feeling that distance for days, even weeks. Your texts have been met with short replies, delays, or nothing emotionally nourishing. And then, suddenly, they send something flirty, sweet, or even deeply personal. It's like they've woken up and remembered who you are to them. You get a, hey, I miss you, or thought of you today, or even a playful inside joke that hits right in the heart. In that moment, it feels like a breakthrough. You think, this is it. They're opening up. We're turning a corner. But here's the truth you need to hear. With a dismissive avoidant, these bursts are rarely a sign of permanent change. They're emotional breadcrumbs, small, satisfying pieces meant to pull you back in without offering the full meal of consistent intimacy. Why does it happen? Often it's because the avoidant senses a shift in your availability. Maybe you've been pulling back, maybe you haven't been initiating as much, and that subtle change triggers a fear of losing you. They reach out just enough to reestablish the bond, not because they're ready to truly show up, but because they don't want the door to close completely. And because these bursts feel so good, they create the most dangerous part of the cycle, hope. You hang on for the next one. You think, if they can text me like this sometimes, maybe they can do it all the time. But days later, you're right back to the drip feed, wondering what happened. It's emotional push-pull in text form, and until you see it for what it is, it can keep you in a loop for months or even years. And the fourth sign, that one hits your nervous system in a different way, because it's not about what they send, but what they don't send. The fourth sign you're texting a dismissive avoidant is the unspoken wall of silence. This isn't the classic ghosting where they disappear for weeks. It's subtler and more calculated. And because it's not a full cutoff, it's harder to call out. You send something that invites emotional connection, maybe a vulnerable share about your day, maybe a question that would require a personal response. And instead of engaging, nothing, no acknowledgement, they simply bypass it. Maybe they reply to something else in your message. Maybe they change the subject entirely. Or maybe they don't reply at all for hours or days, only to pop back with a completely unrelated remark like, "Did you see that show on Netflix?" It's like you spoke into a void and the part of your message that mattered most got swallowed whole. And here's the psychological impact. You start editing yourself. You begin avoiding certain topics because you've learned, often unconsciously, that anything too real or emotionally loaded will hit that silent wall. You keep your text light, safe, and surface level because you're trying to keep the connection alive in any form. But what's actually happening is slow self-erasure. You're shrinking your emotional truth to fit inside their comfort zone. And in doing so, you're teaching them that their silence works, that they can keep intimacy at arm's length without consequence. Why do they do it? For a dismissive avoidant, too much closeness, even in digital form, feels invasive. They've built an internal rule that says, if I respond to this depth, I'm signing up for more closeness than I can handle. So they shut the door before it's fully open, and the cost to you is enormous. You start questioning whether your feelings are too much, whether you're being needy, or whether your desire for connection is somehow wrong. It's not wrong, it's human. The fifth sign will hit even harder because it's the one that makes you feel like you're imagining the whole relationship. The fifth sign you're texting a dismissive avoidant is the disappearing context. This is when they text you in a way that makes you feel like your last conversation never happened. You might have left things on a deeply personal note. Maybe you shared a struggle. Maybe you were mid-discussion about something important. Maybe there was even tension or conflict that felt unresolved. And then, days later, they reappear in your messages as if none of it existed. No follow-up, no acknowledgement, no thread carried forward. Instead, they drop in with something completely neutral like, "Hey, what's up?" Or "Did you end up trying that restaurant?" It's disorienting. You're left holding the emotional weight of the last exchange while they've seemingly erased it from their memory, or more accurately, from the relationship space. This isn't forgetfulness. It's a protective strategy. A dismissive avoidant often compartmentalizes emotionally charged moments, tucking them away so they don't have to face the vulnerability that comes with revisiting them. It allows them to reset the emotional stage to something safer, lighter, and less intimate for them. But for you, it can feel like emotional whiplash. You start questioning your own memory. Did we even have that conversation? Was I overreacting? Did I imagine how intense that felt? And in that questioning, you lose your footing. This disappearing context not only erases important emotional moments, it also prevents the relationship from deepening, because if you can't build on what's been shared, you're always starting from zero. You can't layer trust, resolve issues, or truly grow together if the past keeps getting wiped away like chalk on a board. The sixth sign builds on this, and it's the one that leaves you feeling like you're constantly chasing a moving target. The sixth sign you're texting a dismissive avoidant is the rhythm you can't trust. At first, there's a pattern. Maybe they text every morning. Maybe you get those late night check-ins. Maybe there's a back and forth that feels steady enough for you to relax into. And just when you start to trust it, they break it. No warning, no explanation. The rhythm you were beginning to count on dissolves overnight. It's not just about gaps in communication, it's the unpredictability that keeps you off balance. One week they're responsive, even flirty. The next, they're slow, dry, and hard to reach. Then, out of nowhere, they swing back into warm engagement, only to pull away again. This creates what psychologists call intermittent reinforcement. Your brain starts craving those highs of connection so much that you'll tolerate the lows of absence, hoping the warmth will return. It's the same dynamic that keeps people hooked on slot machines. You never know when you'll hit that jackpot, so you keep playing. For a dismissive avoidant, this erratic rhythm isn't always calculated. Sometimes it's just their way of self-regulating closeness. When they feel comfortable, they lean in. When it feels too much, they retreat. But because they don't explain it, you're left to decode the silences like they're secret messages. The damage is subtle but profound. You begin tailoring your own timing to match theirs, suppressing your natural impulse to reach out when you want to. You become reactive instead of expressive, always adjusting to their clock. And then there's the seventh sign, the one that can make even the most grounded, self-assured person start doubting their worth entirely. The seventh sign you're texting a dismissive avoidant is the selective vulnerability drop. It's rare, but when it happens, it hooks you. Out of nowhere, they'll share something that feels deeply personal. A childhood memory, a past heartbreak, a fear they've never voiced. For a moment, it feels like the walls are down, like you've been let into the inner sanctum. Your heart lights up. You think, this is it. We've broken through. You start imagining that this is the turning point, the beginning of a deeper emotional bond. And then they shut it down. They might change the subject, go silent for days, or revert to surface level texting. The contrast is jarring. One minute you're holding something precious, the next it's like it never happened. Here's the kicker. This flash of vulnerability isn't necessarily manipulative. For a dismissive avoidant, those moments are real, but they're also terrifying. Letting someone in stirs up feelings of dependency and exposure that their nervous system reads as danger. So, almost reflexively, they pull away to restore emotional distance. The impact on you is intense. You start chasing that moment. You text with the hidden agenda of getting back to that depth, replaying the conversation in your head, wondering what you could do to make them open up again. And without realizing it, you're locked in a cycle where their rare vulnerability becomes your reward, the thing you keep coming back for, no matter how inconsistent the connection is. When you put all 7 signs together, you see the bigger picture. This isn't random. It's an attachment style, one that protects them, but slowly erodes your sense of security. And the most dangerous part, if you're not aware of these patterns, you'll keep adapting to them instead of asking whether they're healthy for you. So let's put this all in perspective. When you start texting a dismissive avoidant, it's not just about slow replies, short answers, or disappearing acts. It's about a system, a rhythm of connection and withdrawal that's baked into how they protect themselves. You've seen it. The delays that feel like a quiet punishment. The short, clipped messages that make you second-guess your value. The bursts of warmth followed by cold retreat. The disappearing acts that train you to wait instead of speak. The erratic rhythm that keeps you off balance. And that rare drop of vulnerability that hooks you in deeper than you ever expected. It's not that they don't care. It's that closeness feels unsafe to them. Your need for connection brushes up against their need for space, and suddenly you're both caught in a push-pull dance you didn't sign up for. Here's the truth. You can't control their attachment style, but you can control yours. The more you understand these patterns, the less power they have to quietly erode your confidence. You stop chasing crumbs. You stop making excuses for the inconsistencies. And instead, you start asking the real question, does this relationship nourish me or does it starve me? And if the answer is the latter, you take your power back. Not to punish, not to manipulate, but to stand so firmly in your worth that you no longer settle for a love that makes you feel uncertain, unseen, or unloved. Because at the end of the day, the right person will not make you decode their silences. They'll meet you where you are, in consistency, in clarity, and in care.